And that's the balance that every team has to strike when it's a difficult personality. Is it worth it? And at some point, the skills diminish past the point where it's worth it. The Steelers came to that conclusion with Antonio Brown, for example. They dealt with a lot that we didn't even know about as it was happening. They got to a point where they had enough. And that's right. There's a point where the skills dip just enough that the guy that has created a distraction, a pain in the butt, whatever, it's no longer worth it. Employers everywhere will tolerate a lot as long as you're producing at a high level. The minute you're not producing at a high level, those things that never bothered you officially but unofficially did, all of a sudden they're officially a problem, and it's done. Now, here's what the Jets had to say by the statements they released on Thursday. It was a joint statement from new GM Darren Muji and new head coach Aaron Glenn. It was important to have the discussion now to provide clarity, enable each of us proper time to plan for our respective futures. Added Woody Johnson, owner of the team. From day one, Aaron embodied all that it meant to be a New York Jet, embraced our fans, and immersed himself in our city. That is what I will remember most when I look back at his time here. He will always be welcome, and I wish him only the best of whatever he chooses to do next. That is what I remember most. You know why? There was nothing else to remember. That was it. There were no highlights. There were no on-field achievements. And, hey, it's not his fault. His Achilles tendon blew out 4 snaps into 2023. But that's what happens when you go to an older quarterback, a guy pushing 40, and say, here, be our savior. There's a chance he's going to get injured. When you get older, the soft tissues and the tendons and the ligaments, they're more likely to go. That's one of the risks you take. It's not obvious. It's not something that you definitely will face, but it's on the radar screen more than if he's 23 versus 39, and it happened. So the whole thing was bad, worse than Brett Favre. At least Brett Favre had the Jets in contention for the playoffs until he tore his biceps tendon. This was just a mistake. It was a disaster. Now, they may have made some money off of it, selling tickets in 23, but I think that the statements are what they have to be. The reality is they never should have done it.
Yeah, when you're a starting quarterback in this league, with all the things that happens in the offseason, you have to be part of what they're trying to do in the offseason. Those are the moments when you really gain respect for your teammates. You want to see guys grinding, working hard, lifting weights, getting up early, running, in the meetings, asking questions, going over the playbook. Those are the times where you really grow as a team. And if he's missing those really integral parts of building a team, then you don't want a guy like that part of it. And when you have a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers and he feels like he's above everyone else, then he expects this preferential treatment, and it shouldn't be that way. And that's what I loved about Brady, because Brady never put himself on a pedestal. Brady never elevated himself above his teammates. If anything, he would lower himself. He would humble himself even more for his teammates. And that's the thing that made Tom so special. So even when you saw him at times maybe struggling physically throwing the football, he led with leadership. Guys believed in him because they knew what type of person he was in the fourth quarter, what type of guy he was after the game, whether you win by 30, whether you lose by 30. He was the same guy. You just don't get that with Aaron Rodgers. He's a loose cannon. You don't know what you're going to get.
And you alluded to the fact that he hasn't had that full commitment to everything about the offseason. That was reportedly one of the things that had been presented to him by the Jets, along with stopping the Tuesday bully pulpit appearances with Pat McAfee, where Rodgers would talk about whatever. He'd go down whatever rabbit hole he felt like going down, and it just wasn't good. It was a distraction, as you were saying earlier. And there's been some, it still isn't clear what the connection is between that conversation and the decision to let him go. Because if you're going to let him go anyway, that other stuff doesn't matter. But I suspect they just wanted to see how he'd react to this notion that if you stay, you got to stop doing these things.
Mike, the bottom line is this, and I believe that Aaron Glenn, I think he went back, he talked to the people up top, but he also watched tape. And when you watch tape, it's clear that he can't play football on a level, not even on the level that he was on, but not even as a top 10 or 12 quarterback. He just struggles. He's old. He can't move. The offensive line is a complete mess. They're inconsistent running the football. They don't have many weapons, on the offensive side of the ball. I don't like what they're doing. I like the fact that they moved on from Aaron Rodgers, and the big question is now who becomes the quarterback.
Well, and we'll get to that in a second. The one last point I want to make about the offseason commitment. Last year in the voluntary portion of the offseason, he was there most of the time, more than he'd been in the final years with Green Bay, more than he'd been his first year with the Jets. But then came the mandatory minicamp, and there was that whole week controversy because he went to Egypt. He scheduled a trip to Egypt for the week of the mandatory minicamp. At some point, he offered up some flimsy, disingenuous argument that he wasn't aware it was going to be that week. It's always that week. Dating back to his first year with the Packers, it's always that second week in June that teams have or are likely to have mandatory minicamps. And just schedule your trip a week later. You got 6 weeks off after the mandatory minicamp, and it's mandatory. It sends a message. And to say, oh, well, he was at the non-mandatory stuff. But when you skip the mandatory thing, you're sending a message because no one skips the mandatory thing unless there's some contract issue. You don't just choose not to show up for mandatory minicamp because you got something better to do. And I think that's when the 2024 season went off the rails for the Jets.
Mike, absolutely. And you look at guys that play with Aaron Rodgers in that locker room, and when they see him getting preferential treatment, when they see that he's not attending mandatory things, that causes a division within a locker room. And as if they have a lot of young guys in that locker room, and those guys look up to Aaron Rodgers because of what he's been able to accomplish over his career. But at the end of the day, when you're playing with a great, you want to see how he prepares. You want to see if he's all in. That's where you gain your respect. To this guy, if he's working hard, if he's part of it. It's all a sacrifice for everyone. I mean, no one wants to leave their family and in the middle of the summer, go down and practice for a week and maybe come back and, deal with that situation. So for me, every time I watch Aaron Rodgers, and I want to ask you this, every time I watch Aaron Rodgers, I felt like I was holding my breath. Every time he got hit, every time he got sacked, I'm hoping that this guy doesn't get hurt. Now, was it the same way when you were watching him, or how did you feel when you watched him?
I compare the later years of his career to the later years of Tom Brady's career. Tom Brady developed a strategy that consisted of, and it was a pretty simple approach. He's got guys chasing him around who are literally half his age. I just got to get rid of the football before they get home. And we got to the point where Tom was just throwing it up for grabs. He had a couple of interceptions in the 2020 NFC Championship game against the Packers that were the result of, I don't want to get hit, I'm getting rid of this ball. And I don't care if I throw an interception, I got to live to play another day. And I think Aaron Rodgers needs to pivot to that mindset if he wants to continue. Because I think if he's just straight pocket passer and doesn't try to move laterally or vertically, he's still got the arm to throw at a high level. But when he tries to do the other stuff is when he looks old, because that's when he's not the guy we remember. Brady never was a guy who was going to run around with the football. Rodgers was, and he enhanced his game by his ability to buy time with his legs and to run every once in a while. And it was kind of a sneaky, non-obvious thing, but he used it as part of his arsenal, and it helped. Now that's gone. And if you try to do it, that's when you say, that's not Aaron Rodgers. That's not the Aaron Rodgers I know. But if he just stays back in the pocket and throws lasers because he still has the arm, that's, I think, I don't want to say it's the only way, but it's the best way to play at a high level. It's the best way to avoid injury. And he's got to be willing to do one thing, Rodney, that he doesn't like to do. You got to be willing to throw interceptions. And, his touchdown to interception ratio, that's the thing that makes up for the fact that he's only got one ring. How can we argue Aaron Rodgers is the greatest of all time when he only has one ring? Well, he's got the greatest touchdown to interception ratio. Well, if you want to keep playing, you got to forget about the interceptions because you're going to have to throw a few in order to keep yourself from getting hurt. And I don't know whether or not he even understands that or he's willing to embrace that.
So what's your ultimate point with what you just said? You just don't understand. My point is,
he's got to adjust his game. He's got to adjust his game. And you asked me, does he look old? Does he look different? You asked me a question. You didn't let me answer it.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
You asked me, does he look different to me? And I say he looks different when he tries to run, when he tries to move. That's when he looks the most different to me. He should just stand in the pocket and throw lasers. Then he'll look the same. When he tries to run, that's when I think, man, he ain't the guy he used to be.
Yeah, and that's the problem. You can't just sit in the pocket and just get rid of the ball quickly. We've seen Derek Carr do it. We've seen Tom Brady do it. We've seen a lot of these quarterbacks. There's always going to be times where you have to scramble around and move and things like that. And when I watch him play, the thing I say is I cringe and I just kind of shake my head and say, this guy should not be on a football field. He should be somewhere sitting in the suite, either as a broadcaster or as part of some ownership group like he is. That's what he should be doing, Mike. He just doesn't have it anymore. There comes a point in time when you're 40 and your body breaks down mentally. You're not into it. You got $200-300 million in the bank. You got plenty of money, and you just don't have the motivation. If he was really all in with the Jets, he would have come out and said, "Look, I'll be at everything, Coach Glenn. Whatever you need me to do, I'm gonna be there." But he was the one that wanted to go to the Jets. He's the one that wanted to bring all his guys to the Jets. And when you bring your guys to the Jets, that creates dissension within the locker room. So you have to understand, as he's trying to get better, he's creating more and more dissension within the locker room. And that's why I say this is the best move that the Jets have made, moving on from Aaron Rodgers, going in a different direction. And now you understand that it's not going to be a big distraction like it's been for the last couple of years.
Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.